I was a kid, I would observe the adults in my life and I noticed that they'd fall in one of two categories. The first being those who seemed to be good with money and had money, and the other group were those who were not so good with it. Like, I remember hearing about some relatives that were always in some kind of debt or were always asking to borrow money from other family members. While I didn't fully understand the situation at the time, especially from the perspective of a kid, I always knew that when I grew up, I wanted to make sure that I wouldn't end up being in the latter group. And that sparked off my entire journey of learning about how to make money and how I could set myself up for success. So after reading dozens of books about money and finance and also attending countless seminars on building wealth, I realized that a large factor that determines our success or failure when it comes to being wealthy is our habits. And if we can change our habits, we're a huge step closer towards achieving our financial goals. So in this video, I've compiled what I think are the 7 biggest money habits that are possibly keeping you poor. Starting with the first one, and that is trying to impress other people. Now, this is something that I myself have been guilty of in the past, where when I was in my 20s, all I really cared about was to make as much money as I possibly could so that I could buy all the expensive things. Mostly to flex on my friends, and I didn't even realize it at the time because it was more of like a subconscious thing. But looking back on it now, it was definitely one of the dumbest mistakes that I had made. If you were to take a moment to think and look at your life, your Instagram feed, or even the pages that you follow on Instagram, if you're following pages posting Rolexes and Lambos, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with aspiring to have it, but you have to get it right, and that all those fancy things should come later on in life when you're able to afford them through either your leveraged income or your passive income. Because if you're working a 9 to 5, it just doesn't make any sense to be spending money on luxury items because you're only kidding yourself, and worst of all, you're sabotaging your own financial future. I think the quickest and a guaranteed way to become poor or remain poor is to only focus on buying luxury items without learning about how money works and how you can build your wealth. And this doesn't just apply to really big ticket items like cars or watches, but even things like shoes or having the latest iPhone or dining out at expensive restaurants just so you can brag about it and post it to your stories. This is one of the worst money habits that you can have because trying to seek validation from other people is not a worthy pursuit, and more likely than not, you're gonna end up regretting it in the future. Number 2, spending money on convenience. Most people are aware of this, but somehow they tend to conveniently overlook or ignore the fact that they're paying a premium when they choose convenience. Obviously, like if you were to call an Uber instead of riding the bus, or to order DoorDash instead of making dinner at home, these seemingly insignificant little choices are chipping away at your future financial success. Of course, there might be occasions where you make exceptions, but if you find it being the norm in your life, then you definitely want to consider breaking the habit, especially if you've not already achieved your financial goals. I have a friend of mine who I recently hung out with, and unfortunately he seems to be going through a really rough time financially with a mounting debt, unpaid bills, and to make everything worse, he just lost his job and now doesn't have a source of income. But what I found odd was that at the end of the night after we had hung out, he pulled out his phone and booked an Uber, which really surprised me because instead of choosing to ride a bus home or use public transportation, he picked the option that would easily cost 10 to 15 times more, which I think is absolutely ridiculous. But then I realized it's no surprise that he's in his current financial situation. And this isn't even the first person I've encountered who does this. In fact, a couple years ago, I knew someone who was also not doing so well financially and had a bunch of outstanding credit card debt and didn't even have a job at the time. But yet this person was always ordering food delivery and taking Ubers everywhere. Of course, I'm not here to judge anyone because it's their life at the end of the day, but it's important to note that this is a habit that you gotta avoid if you don't want to constantly stay broke. Number 3, getting too comfortable with bad debt. Now, we live in a society where we can get anything we want pretty much instantly. Like if I wanted some Thai food right now, I could just order it on DoorDash or Postmates and it'll probably be here even before this video is done. Same thing with Amazon Prime same-day delivery. Like we're conditioned to think that we can get whatever we want in an instant. And this breeds the habit of expecting instant gratification, especially through the use of credit cards or those buy now, pay later schemes. Back in the day, if I wanted a pair of new shoes, I'd have to work my summer job, making burgers at a local Burger King, and when I've saved enough money after a couple of months, then I'd go out and buy it. But today, if I wanted something, even if I don't have the money to pay for it right now, I could use a buy now, pay later app like Affirm or Afterpay and buy the item without having to pay for it up front. And the way these apps are marketed, they appear really attractive because they promise zero interest and no fees as long as you make the payments in full within the first 4 allocated payments. But in reality, most people who are likely to use these buy now, pay later services are the ones that are likely to miss their payments. And the companies know this, and they capitalize on the fact that people are gonna miss their payments, and that's when they can charge these ridiculous fees and interest charges of up to 35% annually, which is insane. Buy now, pay later is one of the worst money habits you could have because you're almost guaranteed to end up in a cycle of debt. It's similar to how most people misuse credit cards and have this misconception that credit cards are an easy way to access additional money that you can just easily pay back later, which is absolutely not the case. So while there are benefits to using a credit card, you have to use them the right way and make sure you pay off your entire statement balance in full at the end of each month, which means you can only spend an amount based on the money that you already have in your checking account. Now, Jay-Z once said, "If you can't buy it twice, you can't afford it." He might not be one of the best rappers in my books, but I think he's definitely goated when it comes to business. Majority of people make this mistake of determining what they can afford simply based on how much they earn. And this is one of the reasons why so many high earners are still broke even with a high income. For example, when shopping for a car, most people will go for the most expensive option based on the loan that they're qualified to get. Of course, for a lot of us, a car could be considered a necessity, but there is a huge difference between a car that you use purely for transportation versus a luxury car. So while we might not be able to avoid this expense altogether, we have to avoid the trap of getting a car beyond what we truly can afford. And it's not based on the maximum loan that you can get. This is a wrong measure of affordability. I get why this is hard because for a lot of us, the status symbol represents a lot of things. Like it could represent success and how we're perceived by other people, and most importantly, how it makes us feel about ourselves. But being able to realize this is what's going to set you up for actual financial success and not just end up looking like you're rich, but have a ton of debt looming over your head. The point is, you should always aim to live below your means. Just because you technically can afford something doesn't mean you should, because this would leave you with very little money left over to save and invest and actually move you ahead financially. And this doesn't just apply to cars. The same goes to all of your purchases. For me, when I was shopping for a car a couple years ago, I chose to buy a used beat up old Hyundai because that meant that I'd only be paying a small fraction for it out of what I could truly afford. And it wouldn't matter so much to me if there were any scratches or dings on the car. Now, this leads to the next habit, which is not saving. So because of all the habits we talked about earlier, saving money gets shoved to the back seat and just becomes an afterthought. Most people would earn, spend, and then save whatever little is left over, if there even is any left over. According to the CNBC article, 62% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. And there are many reasons for it, such as inflation and how the cost of living has gone up. While those things are outside of our control, there are things that we can do, and one of them is to change our habits. And so saving money is a major key when it comes to good personal finance. In fact, I think it should come before everything else. Ideally, you want to set aside a portion of your income, could be 20% or 30% or however much you choose, because especially at the start, the habit is more important than the amount. And I would set it up such that this amount will be automatically transferred into a separate account, preferably a high yield savings account. So this way, you'd be less likely to have to resist the temptation of spending this money and fighting it using your own willpower. The key here is you want to save before you even get a chance to spend it. I like to automate my savings and just kind of set it and forget that the money's even there, especially when I've set it up to be transferred into a high yield savings account. With the current interest rates, you could get one with an APY of up to 5.25%. Just make sure that it's FDIC insured so your deposits are safe. This all goes in alignment with everything we've talked about earlier, which can be summed up by embracing a more humble and simple lifestyle. When I realized I've been foolish with how I manage, or rather mismanaged my money in my 20s, I decided to become a minimalist and started being more conscious with how I'm spending every dollar, and as a result of that, I've been able to increase the amount that I have to be invested and grow new sources of passive income. Okay, so this is gonna sound like I'm contradicting myself because we just talked about how important saving is, but there's a big difference between saving and being cheap. There's a quote that I heard recently which goes something like, "The poor man always buys twice," or another version of it is, buy nice or buy twice. Sometimes we might make the mistake of thinking that the cheaper option is always better, but it's not always the case. Like, for example, if you're shopping for a household appliance and you went for the cheapest option, there might be a higher chance that it could break and stop functioning, which then means you need to fork out even more money to buy a replacement, compared to if you were to spend a little bit more money to get a better quality option, because that could save you money in the long run. So we've got to be discerning with how we're spending our money, because the cheaper option may not always necessarily be the best one, especially when it comes to things like insurance or safety equipment like a motorcycle helmet or car seats, or things that you would use for a long time like mattresses. I think it would make sense to spend a little bit more money on these things to get peace of mind and also save you money in the long term. Now, finally at number 7, this is one of my least favorite things in the world, but it's also one of my favorite things to talk about, and that is taxes. Most people don't have a good understanding of taxes and the tax system because it wasn't taught in school and we're just left to figure it all out on our own. But the good news is there are plenty of ways that you could legally pay less in taxes. And I said legally because you don't want the IRS coming after you. So it would be worth your while to take some time to learn a little bit more about the tax system or speak to a professional about your particular situation. Now, I'm not a financial advisor, so none of this is financial advice. But some examples of how you could save on taxes are, say, if you work a 9-to-5 job, check if your employer offers a 401k, which could reduce your taxable income based on the amount that you invest. Or if you're self-employed or run a business, it might make sense to register an LLC or an S-Corp so it could reduce your self-employment tax. You could also utilize things like the tax loss harvesting strategy with any losing investments to offset taxes owed on other investments. There are many ways for you to save on taxes, and so it really pays to have a good understanding of the tax system. Obviously, there are a lot more bad money habits, but I didn't want this video to end up being too long, so be sure to subscribe to see more videos like this in the future. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please drop a like down below, and also check out this other video to see how you can make over $200 a day using easy side hustles like renting out your household tools or even babysitting dogs in your spare time. For now, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.